If you are spiritually awake, your presence alone will irritate the ego in others. This is not your fault. Carl Jung discovered that conscious awareness threatens the collective unconscious agreements that keep people comfortable in their illusions. Your awakening disrupts the shared delusions that others depend on. Today, I will show you exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how to protect yourself from the psychological attacks that inevitably follow. Jung spent decades documenting a disturbing pattern. Individuals who developed what he called differentiated perception, those who could see through social masks and sense psychological truths others missed, consistently became targets. Not because they did anything wrong, but because their very existence reflected back what others refused to see in themselves. The ego relies on collective unconscious agreements, shared illusions about who we are, what matters, and how the world works. When someone becomes spiritually awake, they stop participating in these agreements. They see clearly, they feel deeply, they refuse to pretend, and this conscious awareness becomes an existential threat to everyone still asleep. Here is what makes this so dangerous. The people whose egos feel threatened by your presence do not consciously understand what is happening. They genuinely believe you are the problem. Jung called this shadow projection, and it is the primary weapon the unconscious ego uses to eliminate threats to its comfortable illusions. Let me explain how this mechanism works. Every human being carries a shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge, the selfishness they deny, the manipulation they cannot admit, the cruelty they will not face. When you become spiritually awake, you develop the ability to perceive these shadow contents clearly, not through judgment, but through simple observation. Your consciousness acts as a mirror, reflecting back the truth people have spent their entire lives avoiding. The unconscious mind, when confronted with its own shadow reflected in another person, has two choices: integrate the shadow, which requires painful self-examination and radical honesty, or attack the mirror, which allows the ego to remain comfortable while eliminating the source of discomfort. Jung documented case after case where people chose the second option. They blamed the awakened individual for creating problems that already existed. They accused the perceptive person of being negative, judgmental, or toxic, when in reality, that person was simply observing what was already there. This is why spiritual awakening irritates the ego in others. You are not doing anything to them. You are simply existing with a level of consciousness that their ego cannot tolerate. Your presence forces them to either wake up or double down on their illusions. Most people choose the illusions, and when they do, they must eliminate you from their psychological landscape to maintain those illusions. But the projection itself is just the beginning. What happens next is far more insidious. The projector does not keep their distorted perceptions to themselves, they spread them. Jung observed what he called collective possession, where one person's shadow projections recruit others into a shared delusion. The irritated ego begins telling others about your problems, your negativity, your concerning behavior. They frame it as care or worry, but it is actually an unconscious strategy to build a coalition against the mirror they cannot face. This recruitment behavior follows a predictable pattern. First, the projector tests the waters with subtle comments. They mention your behavior to mutual friends or family members, always with apparent concern. If you have been acting differently lately, maybe you seem stressed, perhaps you have become judgmental. These seemingly innocent observations plant seeds of doubt in other people's minds. Then, as the projector gains confidence, the accusations escalate. Suddenly you are not just stressed, you are creating problems. You are not just different, you are toxic. You are not just honest, you are attacking people. Jung realized that awakened individuals face systematic exclusion from groups, families, and communities, not because of their behavior, but because their consciousness threatens the collective shadow. The group unconsciously organizes around the shared projection, making the perceptive individual the designated problem. This allows everyone else to avoid examining their own shadows. As long as you are the issue, they never have to look at themselves. The irritation you cause in others' egos creates measurable psychological effects. Research on cognitive dissonance explains why awakened individuals make people so uncomfortable. When your conscious presence contradicts someone's self-image, their brain experiences psychological tension. They believe they are honest, but you can see their deceptions. They believe they are kind, but you feel their manipulations. They believe they are evolved, but you recognize their shadow. This contradiction between their self-perception and your clear observation creates unbearable discomfort. The ego must resolve this tension, and it has two options: change the self-perception to match reality, which is painful, or change the perception of you to eliminate the contradiction, which is comfortable. The ego almost always chooses comfort over truth. Ancient wisdom traditions understood this dynamic long before Jung articulated it psychologically. Buddhism speaks of how the awakened person becomes a thorn in the side of the sleeping world. Christianity describes how the light exposes deeds of darkness, and those who love darkness hate the light. Taoism teaches that the sage appears foolish to ordinary people because ordinary consciousness cannot comprehend awakened perception. These traditions recognize that spiritual awakening inevitably creates conflict with those still asleep. But Jung went further than ancient wisdom. He identified the specific psychological mechanisms that transform awakened individuals into targets. And he discovered something that makes this phenomenon truly terrifying. The stronger your spiritual awakening, the more intense the ego reactions you will trigger. Partial awakening might irritate a few people. Complete awakening threatens entire systems. This is why genuinely awakened individuals throughout history have faced persecution, exile, or death. Not because they preached dangerous ideas, but because their consciousness itself was dangerous to the collective ego structures that maintained social order. Jesus did not just teach controversial ideas. His consciousness reflected truth that the religious establishment could not tolerate. Socrates did not just ask difficult questions. His awareness revealed the ignorance that Athenian society was built upon. Joan of Arc did not just claim divine guidance. Her clarity threatened the political illusions her era depended on. Modern awakened individuals face the same dynamic, just with different weapons. Instead of crucifixion or hemlock, you face psychological warfare, gaslighting, reputation destruction, social exclusion. These modern attacks serve the same function as ancient persecution. They eliminate the mirror that reflects uncomfortable truths. Here is what you need to understand. When the ego in others becomes irritated by your spiritual awakening, you cannot fix it by changing your behavior. Jung was crystal clear about this. The problem is not what you do, it is what you are. Your consciousness itself is the threat. You could be perfectly kind, endlessly patient, completely non-judgmental, and you would still irritate their egos. Because the irritation is not about your actions. It is about their shadows. The awakened person's dilemma is this: you cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unfeel what you have felt. You cannot return to unconsciousness just to make others comfortable. Once you have integrated your shadow and developed differentiated perception, you have fundamentally changed, and that change is permanent. So what do you do when your spiritual awakening inevitably irritates the egos around you? Jung developed what he called the protection protocol, not because he wanted awakened individuals to hide, but because he understood that consciousness must be protected to survive in an unconscious world. The first principle of protection is trust your internal reality over external projections. When someone tells you that you are negative, judgmental, or creating problems, and their description contradicts your internal experience, trust yourself. The awakened individual knows their own motivations. You know when you are being genuinely critical versus simply observing. You know when you are creating drama versus identifying drama that already exists. Your internal knowing is more reliable than someone else's projection. The second principle is, never try to convince projectors they are wrong. This is crucial. People who are projecting their shadow onto you are immune to contradictory evidence. Everything you say to defend yourself will be twisted into further proof of their accusations. If you deny being judgmental, they will say you lack self-awareness. If you explain your actual motivations, they will say you are manipulative. If you provide evidence that contradicts their perceptions, they will say you are gaslighting them. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. The more you try to correct shadow projections, the stronger they become. The third principle is withdraw your energy from people who project consistently. This does not mean you hate them or judge them. It means you recognize that their ego structure cannot currently handle your consciousness. You are a mirror they cannot face, so your presence in their life will only create more projection and more pain for everyone involved. Conscious withdrawal is not cruelty, it is wisdom. The fourth principle is find the few who can handle your light. Jung called these individuals the conscious minority. They are people who have done their own shadow work. They have integrated their own darkness. They can see clearly without defensive reactions because they have already faced what you reflect back. These rare individuals will not be irritated by your awakening. They will be energized by it. Your consciousness will feel like coming home after years of exile. Building relationships with conscious individuals creates psychological sanctuary. You need places where you can exist without constantly managing other people's ego reactions. You need people who can receive your perceptions without defensive projection. You need community that honors consciousness rather than attacking it. Finding even one or two such people can mean the difference between thriving and breaking under the constant pressure of collective unconscious aggression. The fifth principle is maintain your boundaries with absolute consistency. When the ego in others becomes irritated by your presence, they will test your boundaries relentlessly. They will demand that you explain yourself, defend your perceptions, or prove you are not the problem they insist you are. These demands are ego strategies designed to pull you back into their distorted reality. You must refuse to play, not with anger, but with calm, consistent boundaries. You do not owe anyone explanations for your consciousness. You do not owe anyone defense against their projections. You do not owe anyone access to your energy just because they demand it. Jung discovered something beautiful in his study of awakened individuals who successfully navigated ego attacks from others. These people developed what he called psychological armor, not defensiveness or coldness, but a kind of inner certainty that could not be shaken by external projections. They knew who they were. They knew what they perceived. They knew their own shadows well enough to distinguish between legitimate criticism and projected content. This knowing became an unshakable foundation that no amount of collective unconscious aggression could destroy. The development of psychological armor requires radical self-honesty. You must know your actual flaws, your real limitations, your genuine shadow contents. When you know these things consciously, other people cannot use them against you. If someone accuses you of something that is actually true, you can simply acknowledge it without defensive reaction. If someone accuses you of something that is not true, you can dismiss it without needing to convince them otherwise. The awakened individual becomes immune to manipulation because they have already faced everything the manipulator might use as a weapon. But here is what Jung found most remarkable about spiritually awake individuals who irritated others' egos. They did not become bitter. They did not become cruel. They did not use their heightened perception as a weapon against those who attacked them. Instead, they became what Jung called the balanced warrior, someone who is perfectly empathetic and strategically protective, someone who can feel everything and choose carefully what deserves their energy, someone who can see everyone's shadow and love them anyway, while refusing to be destroyed by unconscious projection. This balanced warrior state is the ultimate goal of spiritual awakening, not the development of perception itself, but the integration of perception with wisdom, compassion, and strategic awareness. You see clearly, but you do not use your sight to wound. You feel deeply, but you do not let others' pain become your responsibility. You know the truth, but you understand that not everyone is ready to hear it. The spiritually awake person learns to measure consciousness in others before revealing their own. Jung taught his awakened patients to test people gradually, share a small observation, and notice the response. Do they become defensive, or do they become curious? Do they attack the messenger, or do they examine the message? Do they recruit others against you, or do they sit with the discomfort? These responses reveal whether someone's ego can handle your consciousness, or whether your awakening will inevitably irritate them. This discernment is not judgment, it is protection. You are not deciding that defensive people are bad or wrong. You are simply recognizing that their current level of consciousness cannot handle yours without projection. Maybe someday they will do their shadow work and wake up. But until then, your presence in their life will only trigger ego reactions that hurt both of you. The most dangerous people to spiritually awake individuals are not the obviously unconscious. Those people are easy to identify and avoid. The most dangerous are those who believe they are awake but have not actually integrated their shadows. Jung called these individuals inflated. They have spiritual experiences or psychological insights, but they use these experiences to build even larger ego structures. They believe they are evolved, enlightened, or specially chosen. And when your genuine awakening reveals that they are still operating from shadow, their ego reaction will be catastrophic. Inflated individuals are dangerous because they have the vocabulary of consciousness without the substance. They can talk about shadow work without having done it. They can discuss ego death without having experienced it. They can teach awakening without being awake. And when a genuinely awakened person appears in their sphere, that person becomes an existential threat. The inflated individual's entire identity is built on their supposed spiritual superiority. Your authentic consciousness reveals that superiority as another ego game, and they will destroy you to protect that game. Jung spent the last decades of his life studying this phenomenon. He watched awakened individuals navigate a world that punished consciousness. He documented their strategies, their successes, and their failures. And he came to a sobering conclusion. Spiritual awakening in an unconscious world is both a gift and a burden. You cannot unsee. You cannot unfeel. You cannot go back to sleep, but you will pay a price for staying awake. The price is irritating the ego in others and facing the consequences of that irritation. However, Jung also discovered that this price, as painful as it is infinitely better than the alternative. Living unconsciously, participating in collective delusions, and avoiding your own shadow might create temporary comfort, but it prevents the one thing that makes human existence meaningful: individuation. Becoming who you actually are beneath all the conditioning, all the projections, all the collective agreements. The awakened individual has paid the price to become real. And that reality, regardless of how many egos it irritates, is the most precious thing a human being can achieve. So here is the truth that Jung spent his life revealing. If you are spiritually awake, you will irritate the ego in others. This is not optional. This is not something you can avoid with better behavior or more skillful communication. Your consciousness itself is the irritant. The only question is whether you will let their irritation dim your light, or whether you will protect your awakening with the fierce wisdom it deserves. The spiritually awake person understands that being a mirror is not the same as being an enemy. When others react with hostility to what you reflect, that hostility belongs to them. It is their shadow, their projection, their unconscious content. You are simply the screen on which they display what they cannot face in themselves. This understanding allows you to maintain compassion without taking responsibility for their reactions. You can see their pain without making it yours. You can understand their projections without accepting them as truth. Jung's final insight about this phenomenon was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The spiritually awake individual serves an evolutionary function for human consciousness. You are the advanced scout, exploring psychological territory that the collective is not yet ready to enter. Your awakening creates friction, because evolution always creates friction. The caterpillar must destroy itself to become a butterfly. The seed must break open to become a tree. And the collective unconscious must be disrupted by awakened individuals to evolve into collective consciousness. You are not irritating others' egos because you are doing something wrong. You are irritating their egos because you are doing something right. You are living proof that consciousness beyond collective agreements is possible. You are evidence that shadow integration creates freedom. You are a demonstration that awakening, while costly, is worth every sacrifice. And unconscious egos will always attack what they cannot understand, cannot control, and cannot assimilate into their comfortable illusions. The spiritually awake person's ultimate power is this: you cannot be gaslighted back to sleep once you have truly awakened. You cannot be convinced that your perceptions are wrong once you have integrated your shadow. You cannot be manipulated back into collective unconsciousness once you have tasted individual sovereignty. The irritated egos around you can project, attack, exclude, and recruit others against you. But they cannot take away what you have become. Your consciousness is yours, and it is untouchable. This is why Jung called spiritually awake individuals the most powerful people in any system. Not because they have external power, but because they have internal sovereignty. They know what they know. They see what they see. They are who they are, and no amount of collective pressure can change that. This kind of power terrifies egos, because it cannot be controlled through the usual mechanisms of social pressure, reputation destruction, or emotional manipulation. If you recognize yourself in this description, if your spiritual awakening has irritated the egos of people around you, if you have faced projection, exclusion, and psychological attack simply for being conscious, know this: you are not alone, you are not crazy, you are not the problem. You are an awakened individual navigating an unconscious world, and Jung mapped this territory specifically so you would understand what is happening to you. Your spiritual awakening will continue to irritate others' egos until either they wake up or you separate from them. This is the nature of consciousness meeting unconsciousness. There is no peaceful middle ground where you can be fully awake and they can remain fully asleep without friction. The light always exposes what the darkness hides. The mirror always reflects what the ego denies. Your presence always reveals what others refuse to see. But here is the promise that Jung's work offers. Every person whose ego you irritate is also a person you offer the possibility of awakening. Your consciousness is an invitation. Most will reject that invitation with hostility, but some, the precious few, will feel something stir inside them when they encounter your light. They will recognize that their irritation is not about you. They will become curious about their own shadows. They will begin their own journey toward awakening. And your example, your presence, your refusal to dim your light will have served as the catalyst for their transformation. This is the gift of being spiritually awake in an unconscious world. Yes, you will irritate egos. Yes, you will face projection and attack. Yes, you will experience exclusion and misunderstanding, but you will also be the light that shows others the way home. You will be the mirror that reflects their potential for consciousness. You will be the proof that awakening, despite its costs, is possible. And some people, the ones who are ready, will follow your example into their own transformation. Jung believed that this process of individual awakening, spreading person by person through conscious example, was how collective consciousness would eventually evolve. Not through mass movements or political change, but through awakened individuals refusing to participate in collective delusions and paying the price for that refusal. Each person who wakes up makes it slightly easier for the next person to wake up. Each person who integrates their shadow makes shadow work slightly more acceptable. Each person who survives ego attacks from others creates a path that future awakened individuals can follow. You are not irritating others, egos for nothing. You are paying the evolutionary price that consciousness always demands, and your payment creates possibilities for others that did not exist before you. This is the meaning Jung found in the suffering of awakened individuals. Not that suffering is good, but that it serves a purpose beyond personal experience. Your consciousness contributes to the slow, painful, necessary evolution of human awareness. So protect your awakening, trust your perceptions, maintain your boundaries, find your conscious few, and refuse to dim your light just because unconscious egos find it irritating. You are exactly what the world needs, even though the world does not yet know how to receive you. You are the future, trying to be born in a present that is not ready for you. You are consciousness incarnate in a world that worships comfortable unconsciousness. If you found yourself in this exploration of spiritual awakening and ego irritation, drop a comment below sharing your experience. Have you noticed that your growth triggers defensive reactions in others? Have you been accused of being the problem when you were simply seeing clearly? You are not alone in this experience. Subscribe for more insights into navigating consciousness in an unconscious world, because this channel is dedicated to those who refuse to go back to sleep, no matter how much pressure they face to conform. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.